Find you in. Jim.
What's up?
Can anyone hear me on the line here?
Yes, I can hear you, Chuck. Can you hear me? I know I did it.
Francisco, can you hear me?
I can, and you can hear me?
I'm sorry, that was a little garbled. Would you say that again? You can hear me?
I can. Can you hear me, Chuck?
I can very well, yes. Thank you.
Okay,
I'm
very good.
sorry.
No problem.
I'm a little bit paranoid since we had that horrible connection that time and I kept going in and out, but we fixed that on this end and I can hear you loud and clear.
All right, very good.
Hello, Lynn's online. Can you hear me?
Yes, Lynn, I can hear you.
Great. Thank you. Hot one, guys, huh?
Chuck, I see that it's 6 o'clock. I'll defer to you as to when we get this kicked off. I'm ready to go whenever you are.
Okay, sir. Fine. Thank you. And thank you. Can everyone hear me okay?
Fine.
Yes.
Excellent.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you all for joining in on this session tonight. We have a very lengthy agenda. We only have 3 hours to get through it. I suspect there'll be some issues which we will have to move on from, but we'll create a short list of those issues and figure out a way to come back to them. In order to get through this material tonight, we're going to have to move fairly quickly, but it won't be the last time we discuss these items. So I would ask that we keep that in mind as we have this discussion, that it's important that we get through everything. And it may seem like we're moving fast, but from this will be a short list of items that we will develop a way to circle back on. I think with that in mind, unless anyone has any questions for me, I'll turn it over to Francesco and not use up any more of the important 3 hours. Francesco?
Thank you very much, Chuck.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome. As we usually do, we'll take a look at our agenda and what's in front of us here this evening. We're getting very close to the end of our project schedule, which isn't to say we're close to being complete with our work, but with respect to drafting of amendments, we're very near completion. And so what I want to focus on this evening are the remaining recommended amendments. And based upon our May meeting, we did draft like 17, I believe, specific amendments, 16 or 17. And so I want to very briefly review those with you. We talked about those individual items at length last month. And so I don't think we need to relitigate those, but I do want to provide you an overview of how we've taken those recommendations and organized those into amendments. There were 2 items from our meeting last month that we did not have time to address, and so I'd like to address those this evening, and that includes a staff recommendation to rezone an area near Cavendish Lane, Elm Ridge Road, and Timber Ridge Road, and then also to discuss EDC's recommendations for the PV5. And then I think most importantly this evening, we want to revisit our recommendations 1 through 40. And we discussed triaging those, and I'll explain to you a little bit more about what we mean. But we need to make decisions as to what we move forward with, what we revise for moving forward with, and what we want to table, whether temporarily or indefinitely. And then we'll take a look at our next steps from there. So our project schedule, this will be the last special meeting that I convene with you. I think it's critical in order to move this forward that you either continue to meet through special meeting or you reserve time on your regular agendas to advance these recommended amendments. But this is our last meeting that I'll be leading. And so we're getting to the end of the schedule with respect to that. But as I mentioned, there's still much more work to be done. All right, so I want to review the recommended amendments, and we're going to work through this in an orderly fashion in order of where they would appear in the document and the zoning regulations. So we're starting pretty far back here at section 6, even though we have not been focused on that section of the regs. We did have one item come up that is primarily located in section 6, so that's where we'll begin, and that's the amplified entertainment. As we talked about last month, we want to remove this restriction to restaurants and liquor sales places. And I think we all discovered together last month as we took a look at the regulation on the screen that was full of really excessive content regarding graffiti and litter and a lot of unnecessary regulation. Additionally, it appeared to be a really high standard requiring noise and vibration analysis. So we've simplified that regulation and really cut it in half. And we removed the restriction to restaurants and liquor sales places. And that's exactly what recommendation 41 is. And I'll just pause very briefly after I introduce each one of these to receive any questions or comments you may have. And then as Chuck suggested, we really need to keep things moving.
So this is Lynn.
Hi, Lynn.
I'll just say, hello. I agree with, the changes that we talked about, graffiti and things like that.
Yeah.
But I don't recall everyone agreeing that we would not restrict to restaurants, that we would open it up to other businesses. So,
yeah.
Yep.
That's exactly where our discussion began, actually. That's what was the focus of it initially, was to remove the restriction. And then once we introduced that idea, we discovered that there was all this other baggage with the regulation. So that was the initial premise. And I wonder if anyone else.
Okay. I believe everybody was okay with getting rid of the other baggage, but did not did not buy into, you know, not, you know, expanding the businesses that could have amplified music.
Does anyone want to care to weigh in on this? And this is certainly not an agenda that I'm pushing here. I had feedback from staff that this is a kind of a common use for other types of businesses, and there was an interest in removing the restriction. So I'd be interested in hearing what anyone else has to say on this.
Why don't we just circle back on this? I'm
Okay.
And see, you know, we don't have enough commissioners on the call tonight to really gain a consensus. I don't think so. Lynn's point is noted, and I think we owe her an answer.
All right, very well. Okay, Section 8, Commercial Industrial Zoning District Standards. And so here, and Lynn, this is in response to concerns you had that you voiced over the past couple of meetings. We have introduced a new requirement that does not currently exist in the regulations in any way. It's called a front yard landscaping requirement, and it's applicable to all properties in commercial and industrial zones. And the requirement is that a minimum 25% of the front yard, exclusive of areas for driveways, fire access, and walkways, is occupied by landscaping in the form of planting, trees, beds, planters, or maintained lawn, with a restriction on any barren areas of soil or mulch. And this would apply to any property that's 10 or more feet back from the street. Obviously, you're in the PV5 and you have setback at 10 feet. There's no room for landscaping. So this is the first time you've seen this recommendation. It's in response to concerns about landscaping or lack thereof in front of commercial properties. And so I'm interested in feedback on this.
I think this is an excellent amendment, and I think it will address an issue that comes up with almost, Lynn, I think you'll agree with me, almost every application that we look at is either void of this because it's not in the regulations, or it's insufficient. So I'm all for this.
I totally agree. The only change I would suggest is I'm not sure planters meet the requirements. So in the bullet B, where it says a combination of lawn, planters, planting beds, or trees, if we can get rid of planters, I think that would be great.
Okay, we're trying to provide maximum flexibility, but I'm completely fine with that. That makes sense to everyone else.
I am as well.
Okay, very well. We will do that.
Thanks.
You're welcome. All right, moving on to Section 11, lot standards. We talked about paper streets. I think we're all in agreement that we want to allow the DPW director to waive the requirement that the street is constructed before single family home properties are improved. And we're all in agreement on that, correct?
I am.
Okay.
Yep.
Good. So as you can see from the recommended amendment, it's just 2 lines of text that we have to add to make that possible. It's a very simple amendment. Recommendation 56 is much more involved. And this comes back to the issue of undersized lots, which we've talked about in more than one capacity. Last month, I introduced a recommendation that we replace the existing undersized lot regulation with a new regulation, which it simplified things. However, upon review, staff and primarily your zoning enforcement officer had real concerns. And I think what it comes down to is that they've learned how to use the existing regulation to make things work. It's the grease that makes things work. And it's an important tool to them, even though it's cumbersome and it's not very broad. It's very narrow, applies only to single family residences. So we didn't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. So we went back to work on this. And what we did is we kept the existing provision, which basically allows undersized lots to use the zoning standards of the zone in which their lot would be conforming. And so that applies to the setbacks and all that, FAR, all those standards. So that still is allowed for single family residences only. So we've maintained that aspect. What we've done is we've merged it with the concept we came up with, which is to allow that all undersized lots are considered existing as of the time of adoption of this, are considered conforming with respect to size only. They still have to meet all the other standards of the zone in which located. With respect to size only, they're considered conforming, which means they can be built on and improved. And that would allow usage by other than single family residences. So that would allow any other type of use in any zone to improve an undersized lot, provided they conform with all of the rest of the bulk standards of the district in which located. We did provide a very important provision to this, and that is this would apply only to lots for which the minimum lot size is the requirement for the use. And to provide you an example, if in a residential zone, for example, you allow a community center, and you specify a 2-acre minimum for the community center, then this would not be a loophole for something that you've determined really requires a much larger lot or a lot of a certain size. So we've crafted it so it's only applicable to uses that are permitted by way of the minimum lot size for the district. So I think we've come up with something that it's going to really help the hundreds of undersized lots you have without being adversely impactful or disruptive in any way. And so with that explained, I'm happy to receive any questions or comments on it.
Does the zoning enforcement officer, has she reviewed this language?
She has not yet had a chance because it just went out on Friday. So we have not yet had her feedback.
I think it's very important that Candy look at this, and she deals with this on a regular basis, and it's more administrative than it is anything else. So, and this is always an issue in every rewrite as to how you sanction undersized lots that are non-conforming. But this looks fine to me. I just want to make sure that Candy looks at it and approves it.
Okay.
So I have two questions. I have just two questions on this. One is when you say if it's a residential area, then commercial can't go into that area, right? It's for any use that is within the zone, correct? Approved for that zone.
This is not a use regulation. This is agnostic with respect to the uses. We're not changing uses that are allowed. This is very narrowly focused on the minimum lot size requirement and providing relief from that because of the overwhelming number of non-conforming lots with respect to lot size.
Except
so if
I
it's
thought
not,
I thought we dealt with most, I would say 80% of the undersized lots. I thought we dealt with that, and the only congested area where we have undersized lots and that we didn't change was at the request of that neighborhood. So I'm not quite sure why we need this, because we've already dealt with this in our zone changes. So I'm not sure where this applies. And my second question is, so that's a statement. I'm not sure this is that this is necessary. And I'd like somebody to explain why it is necessary when we spend so much time going over, let's get rid of these undersized lots and change the zone. So that's one, because I don't think we should just make a change that's not necessary. And the second point is, how does this affect our proposal for shifting from FAR to,
Lot coverage.
non-porous?
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Chuck. How
Yeah.
does this affect that? So those are my two
Yeah.
comments.
Okay. And
I think there's tons of non-conforming lots remaining after all the redistricting and all the rewrite. There's still tons of undersized non-conforming lots that exist. Some of them are vacant, and this is a standard provision that goes into most regulations, and without it could be, the regulations could be confiscatory. So that's my experience with this specific regulation, that it really has to be in here.
Chuck, I agree with that assessment. So first of all, you say we dealt with, but we haven't adopted the recommendations for rezoning those areas. So there's the whole assumption that we're successful in doing so. So let's assume that we are. The areas we recommended for rezoning are just areas that have the highest concentration of nonconformity, and there are still hundreds of other lots in other areas sprinkled throughout the town that are nonconforming with lot size. So this is intended to address those other properties, and maybe if we're not successful in rezoning those areas, this also provides a solution for areas that aren't rezoned. With respect to it, if we do move from FAR to coverage, once again, as I said, we are going to continue to require, with the new content that we're adding to this, that the lot meet all of the other requirements of the zone. So we give them a pass just on the lot size, but they still have to conform with coverage, setbacks, height, all the other bulk area height standards. So this isn't a waiver on the rest of those standards in any way.
Okay. Thanks for that explanation. I'm gonna I agree with what you said, and thanks for the justification. I'm just going to take a moment outside of this to make sure that the whole thing about everything else applies is very clear. So there might be some words missing there, but I agree in general. Thank you.
Sure.
Yep.
Yeah, you're
Fair
welcome.
enough, Lynn. Thank you. Let's move on.
Yep.
Okay. All right, moving on to historic and cultural resource sites. As I talked about last month, you don't have the authority to restrict demolition outside of your demolition delay ordinance. So we need to remove any restrictions or any punitive measures with respect to development rights because something was torn down, and instead just refer to your demolition delay ordinance to flag that. And that's about all we could do. Okay.
Sounds good.
All right. Soil erosion and sedimentation control. Here we're just consolidating content. We're moving some content out of section 12.8 that is a little bit redundant with most of the regulation in this area, which is actually in 15.5. So we move a paragraph into 15.5 just to better co-locate relevant content.
I have just one question on this one.
Yep.
And that's if something isn't associated with a development application. An individual wants to regrade his lot and reseed it and re-landscape, and he's going to disturb more than a half an acre. Shouldn't that be something that's subject to, or a commercial establishment wants to regrade and re-landscape, or shouldn't that also be captured in this and require the submission of a sediment and erosion control plan, or is that already in the regulation?
Chuck, admittedly, I need to dig into that because a project like that doesn't require a zoning permit. And so it's not showing up on the radar. So then the question is, how do you make them subject to that requirement?
Well,
Right? How does it?
I think they should be, because you
Yeah.
could get
Yeah.
a large raw slope that
Yep.
is disturbed adjacent to a sensitive receiving water body, and no sediment and erosion control plan. I mean, I can think of a project like that that's been going on for years right here on our street, and
Yeah.
there's no provision to require a sediment and erosion control plan, and there really should be one. So think about it.
Okay.
Let's move on. But if that can be captured somehow at this point, as maybe under the excavation
Yep.
regulation,
Yep.
it more properly belongs under that. And if it trips the excavation regulation, maybe it trips the sediment and erosion control regulation too. Okay.
Okay. I'll
Thank you.
take a look at that.
I agree 100%, 100% with
Okay.
that. And I'm just going to say one other thing to think about is when you change the drainage or the slope and it goes into, a neighboring lot. So now their lot is,
Not
got
allowed.
some issues that
Not
it never
allowed.
had before.
That would constitute a diversion, and it's illegal.
Okay.
Good point. Good point. And you get a lot of spats about that. But when the town engineer reviews the grading plan, he always makes sure that it observes property lines, that water is directed in the manner it always is directed, or it's considered a diversion, and diversions are not allowed.
Yeah, but only if the town engineer sees it. That's the point.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Very good. All
Good
right,
idea,
Chuck.
Chuck.
I have your comments. I made note of it.
Thank you.
Recommendation 46, telecommunications antennas and towers. As we talked about, Connecticut Siting Council has the ultimate authority in this area. There is value in maintaining some regulations to basically set a basic standard as to what they should be trying to achieve, even if they're not compelled to comply with that standard. What I found as I dug into this regulation is that there were references to statute that were not the correct sections and not the correct procedures. Whether that was done in error initially or whether the statute had since been changed, I don't know. But it was really important to correct that. So what we've done is we've cut the length of the section about in half, and we placed our emphasis, our focus on the procedural aspects and how the siting council and the developer interfaces with the town. So the procedural aspects are clear to the town and to the commission. And then we've identified standards or guidance standards that are advisory to the sites of these facilities, both the siting of the facilities and to the grounds on the facilities. So we've maintained advisory standards, changing words like shall to should, since they can be advisory only. All right. Any questions on this item or the changes?
Nope, sounds good.
I think it'll be far more effective because right now it's a mess, and I think clearly right now, given the Siting Council has the authority, is to not even look at these pages of the regulations because they're not consistent with statute and they're hard to interpret.
They have exclusive jurisdiction, but I totally agree with the amendments, and I think we should move forward.
All right. Recommendation 47, noise and vibration. This is very simple. We're changing this regulation. We're adding just a little bit on to the sentence so that it perfectly aligns with the town's noise ordinance, which extends until 8 o'clock on Sunday mornings from 6 to 8. So we're adding 2 more hours. Outside of that, this aspect is untouched. Yeah.
Sounds good.
Yeah. Good. natural and unique features, the current wording on this is that removal of natural and unique features such as mature trees has to be approved by the Department of Planning. And then the question is, well, who in the Department of Planning, and what about the commission? And what if you have an approval that's part of a site plan approval or special permit approval? Why can't the commission approve it in the course of that approval? So here we just changed it from Department of Planning to CEO or commission, and that way that approval is done concurrent with whether it's a zoning permit approval, site plan, or special permit by the body that has the authority to do so. Okay.
Should we somehow distinguish that areas of wetlands? Because I don't think you can remove trees in a wetland without wetlands approval.
And this doesn't suggest that you can.
Okay.
I think there are a lot of elements of the zoning regulations that have some overlap with Inland Wetlands Authority for upland review.
Planning would know that, though.
Within the
Planning would
wetland,
know
yeah.
that,
So
right.
it's just exactly. Yeah.
No problem.
Okay.
Can
All right,
I just
moving on. Yes,
Like
Lynn, go ahead.
I've never seen an application where somebody has come in and we've asked them, well, what existing trees do you have on this property, and are you taking them down?
Well, you have the authority. You gave yourself the authority to do exactly that. And in your site plan requirements, I believe you do require existing vegetation to be noted in the survey. And so you certainly have the authority to inquire as to what's being removed and why. And really, if you see, as you deem fit, if you see an area that should be better preserved, to require that area to be preserved.
Most of the proposed site
Chuck.
plans that we review do show limits of clearing. On any major site, it always shows limits of clearing.
Right, but we don't know, like, we've never said, okay, this 200-year-old tree, it's in the center of the lot and you're not taking it down. We've never.
No, we know that, though, because
that.
there's a survey that is an existing condition survey that shows all the trees. So you would know that if you compare the two plans.
Lynn, to your point, this section is intended to give you the authority to do so, even if you have not been exercising it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Duly noted.
All right. Okay, continuing on to permit plan and bond requirements. Section 15 is just procedural with respect to special use permit. And we want to add one line about how that works. And essentially, once you get a special permit, you don't then take the special permit and go down to the building department and get your building permit. The special permit authorizes authorizes the planning department to issue you a zoning permit. And then the zoning permit is used to pull the building permit. So we're adding some language into here to make it explicitly clear as to how that works. Okay.
Sounds good.
Recommendation. Good. Recommendation 50, validity/completion. We're renaming this section from validity, which is fairly ambiguous, to completion of work. And this surrounds the duration of a site plan and any expiration dates for that. And so what we've done is we've changed this section to align with statute. And essentially what statute says is that the site plan needs to be good for at least 5 years. And there are certain conditions, we talked about it last month, that allows it to be extended even further for plans that were approved or opened during COVID. And it also allows you to grant extensions up to 10 years in total before an applicant has to come and go through the process all over again. So we've amended this so that it matches exactly what statute says you can do and the way you should be administering this.
I'm fine with that.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. Recommendation 51, the commission action on a site plan or special permit. And this is tied to the recommended amendment I just profiled. The special permit is linked to the site plan in that almost every single special use permit you approve has an associated approved site plan with a few exceptions. For any special permit approval that is linked to an approved site plan, you cannot revoke that special permit or have an expiration date for the special permit that is less than the site plan. And that's essentially what the courts, what case law tells us. So we need to change this language just by removing a sentence that suggests that you can apply any duration you want to a special use permit. And you can't, because it's really governed by the site plan approval and the completion of work specified for the site plan itself. All right.
So when we grant an extension, it doesn't have to be in 5-year increments. Is that correct?
No. You can do 1-year increments.
Okay. Thank you.
The language remaining in here still allows you to place conditions. So there may be a use where you essentially negotiate with the property owner that, or the applicant, that they're going to be done within a certain time frame and they're going to do these other things. And so we maintain language that allows you to place conditions on that. But what we remove is any specific reference to limited time frame duration.
Sounds good.
Okay, and so the first sentence we keep is the actions you have, the authority you have when you need to make a decision are to approve, deny, or modify. And so under the modification, you can make a request of the applicant that they comply with whatever you see fit within reasonable standards. So it's approve, deny, or modification, and that's the operative piece of this. And the second part of it is really kind of distraction from what this is trying to achieve by making it clear as to what you should be doing when you're making a decision. Okay?
Great. Yep.
All right. Recommendation 52, changes and modifications to improved plan or special use permit. And so here we want to separate out minor changes to a plan and major changes. And this is to allow minor changes to be approved administratively and major changes to have to go to the commission. Now, this does, and we talked about this a little last month, this does put the ZEO in the position to make that determination as to what's minor or major, and we provide very specific language and examples as to what may be minor, what may be major. We also provided language that says that the ZEO, if they have any question whatsoever, or if they are uncertain as to whether or not something's minor or major, they can refer it to the commission. They can refer it to you. And so you may ultimately decide that it's just a minor change. You could approve it, or you could refer it back to the zoning officer, authorizing them to approve the minor change.
I think this is a great idea, and it gives the staff some discretion and precludes applicants from going through an extensive special permit process for these minor, and minor I think is defined well, these minor changes. This is the way that most towns operate today, and the commission can really focus on the major items that should be brought before them, and not all of these housekeeping issues that under the current regulations have to come to us. So I wholeheartedly support this.
Okay. Any
Makes
other
sense.
questions or comments? Good, Lynn?
Yep,
Okay,
it makes total sense.
good. Okay, let's move on.
Just
Yeah.
one other, any signage or lighting changes would be considered major, right?
It depends on the extent. You know, if it's just one light fixture that's being swapped out, I think that could very easily be determined to be minor.
Right,
Right. You
but-
know, yeah, yeah. And here is
Okay.
you're really going to have to establish kind of a basic rhythm with this and a protocol and have a number of these projects come before the ZEO. And the ZEO might start out very conservatively and refer little stuff up to you if they're not sure. And then eventually you'll kind of sort out, hey, you know, this, you go ahead, you can make a decision on this. We don't need to see this type of change. And so it's going to take a little time, I think, for this to get established. But once it gets established, I think those lines will become very clear as to what's minor and major.
Okay, sounds good.
All right.
Agreed.
Okay. Section 16, studies and statements. Third-party review. This is something new that we're introducing. We talked about it last month. And we're now, even though you currently have this right by statute, because it's not in your zoning, it probably doesn't occur to you that you could ask for this. So we want to put it right into the zoning, and we want to put it there as well to make applicants aware that, hey, the commission might ask you to pay for third-party review. So we have new section 1511, third-party review, that authorizes the town to require applicant to pay for third-party review of applications. And it's one paragraph of text and applies to site plan and special use permit applications.
Again, I've seen this in
Very common.
in larger towns, and it works. It works really well, and puts the burden on the applicant as opposed to the town. We recently had a costly review of the aquifer protection zone issues on a particular application, and it was a very costly review. So, that third-party review would be in the future be borne by the applicant.
And the authority to put this burden on the applicant is specifically given to you by statute. And so it's not something that towns have experimented with and are getting away with. This is something that statute specifically authorizes you to do.
Francisco, staff can make this determination, correct?
Yes. So the way we've written it is that it's applicable to any site plan or special use permit application, but we haven't worded it that the commission has to request or require.
Okay, good.
This.
Yeah.
Okay, so we leave it open. We leave it open to staff or to the commission to request that third-party review.
I think the staff's
just
done a
the
good job.
commission-
The staff's done a good job with this in the past and been very reasonable in terms of making these types of determinations. And the third-party reviews have been few and far between since I've been here. I think they've all been warranted.
Can I just ask, do we have to state in the minutes or anything that, and this will be at the expense? Or can we just say, we require this review? I'm not sure why we would have ever paid for it if it's understood that the state statute says the applicant pays for it. Like, do we have to state it? Is that why?
And not necessarily.
I think it's clear if it's in the regulations.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay, I just
Yeah.
didn't know if, in general, do we have to state it at the time that we require the third-party review? Do we have to say, and this will be at your expense?
Oh, I
No.
think very much so. You want to make it clear in your request for more
Okay.
information. And then what you
Okay.
should do is say per section 1511,
Yeah.
we request that you provide a third-party review of the traffic study and that you
Okay.
incur the
All
cost
right.
of doing so.
But it's at your sole discretion. It's at your sole
Right.
discretion. So,
Yeah.
or I
Okay.
guess in this case, it would be a vote of the commission and at the commission's sole discretion.
Well, what I
Okay.
was saying is staff should decide this before the commission because we're the ones that do the plan review months in
Agreed.
advance.
Agreed.
So
That's why it's written.
it shouldn't be the commission deciding when to do a third party review. It should be staff.
Mhm.
Okay. Okay.
Clifton, do you feel that just as a matter of policy and procedure, that will work fine, or do you feel that needs to be explicitly stated within the regulation?
I think it's fine the way it's written because it
Okay.
says the town may require.
Yeah.
So as long
Yeah.
as statutorily, that means the town staff.
Yes, it
Because
does.
then when I get
Yeah.
an application, I can immediately send it out for the third party
Yeah.
review.
Right. Yeah. And
Would
then
the third
town
party be selected by the town?
It typically is,
Yeah.
or
That-
approved,
but
by the
is
town.
that stated
Yeah.
here?
It is not. We leave it open.
Do we have to
I-
come up with a separate ordinance or policy to cover that? Or is it just our
Let me
normal
take-
contracting procedures?
Yeah, I think that's
Let-
we should consult with Jim Sullivan, and
Yeah.
the town's charter is very specific on how you select professionals, and it's QBS, quality-based selection, and in some cases with price, some cases without.
That's only if it's over a certain dollar amount, though. These
Right,
third-party
right,
reviews
there are
wouldn't fall into
exceptions.
that category.
There
So
are
we have
exceptions.
existing contracts with engineering firms that could conduct
Mm-hmm.
the review. I'm thinking in the case of doing a third-party review of a traffic study, we don't have a contracted firm.
Right. Right,
So
that would be an exception, right?
that's something I'll have to talk to Jim about.
Sounds good.
Okay. I
If
think
everybody's
we've got
okay, we
enough
should-
here to
we should
enable
move.
whatever it is you need to do, though. All right.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right. Section 17, procedures. Architectural design review. So we've done a little bit of work here, some cleanup. First of all, we've exempted detached accessory dwelling units from design review. We've removed requirements that are redundant with the site plan and special use permit requirements. Basically, it provides a list of all the plans and drawings and other things that have to be submitted for design review. Those are already required by the special use permit or the site plan application. So we don't need to state that list again because the entire application gets sent over for design review. And then we changed the reporting requirements to reflect current practices, which is basically the minutes from the meeting are provided in a staff report, and that is what is currently considered to be the comments submitted by the review board. Okay.
Sounds good.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay, recommendation 55 is real simple. We just need to pull out a section that is now outdated. CBA no longer approves location auto sales and service establishment. ZO does that. We have it right in 5.3.3, but we missed it here, so we need to take that out. Okay.
This is long overdue.
Yeah. So just to go back on this a minute, the legislative record on this is longer than the actual statute, because this is flip-flopped no less than 4 times in the past 30 years as to who signs off on this. It's ridiculous. I don't know why it's got to be so complicated, but I think
agree.
they finally have it right again. They have it right again.
Correct.
Okay. So now we're going to get to content we didn't have a chance to get to last month. We do have a staff recommended zone change. So this would be in addition to the other zone changes that we've recommended. And this is an area up near the HI-60 bordering CS5 there's an RM20 zone that really makes no sense at all. It's sandwiched in. It doesn't follow lot lines at all. It splits lots in half. There's no multifamily residential there. There may be a duplex or something. This zoning makes no sense at all. And so the recommendation is, which makes all the sense in the world, is to rezone everything in red to RA20 to follow the lot lines of these residential properties and return more of that property to RA20, which at the same time would just better protect some of those areas and ensure that there's a buffer maintained between the residential and the commercial. All right. Any questions on that? And if we all agree to this, I'll write it up into a recommended amendment.
I think it's consistent with the feedback that we've received.
It is. We've had at least one very strong advocate for this, and I think as you take a look at it on the map, it makes complete sense to clean this up in the course of doing the rest of our work.
Agreed. I would proceed.
Okay. All right, the next item, there's a little more to this. The EDC has been very active in discussing changes they would like to see in the PV5. Some of this was potentially going to be addressed by House Bill 5002, which was actually given a name, Public Act 2549, before the governor vetoed it. Was it yesterday or Monday? But essentially what they're looking for is to provide additional relief in the PV5 to allow a little more flexibility for infill development and redevelopment and residential development. So they're looking for exemptions from the bulk and density regulations for larger lots that are used for residential that may not meet the frontage requirements. They're also looking to allow for increased density from 1 unit per 1,000 square feet to 1 unit per 800 square feet. So that would, even though we can't restrict dwelling units by unit size, we still can restrict by density. So this is a density cap, even though it's based on a square foot figure. What they're also looking for is reduce the commercial floor area requirement from 1/3 of the building to 20%, or some form of ratio based on the frontage. And item 3 makes a lot of sense to me. In fact, I had this conversation today with the city of Bristol, where they have in their downtown zone a requirement that street level space be reserved for commercial use. And the real demand they have is for residential. And there's the market is weak in many areas for office and retail. And so I think it does make sense to dial back some of the numbers, not to outright remove any requirement for commercial on the first floor or in a building, but to dial it back a little bit to allow a higher proportion of residential. And they're also looking to just outright completely eliminate their parking requirement. And of course, the parking overlay district does provide some relief in Pawcatuck, but not complete relief. And so they're looking just to completely eliminate parking requirement. So this, I realize the first time we're talking about this, so I'm very interested in your thoughts on this, and it probably requires a lot more additional consideration before we prepare any amendments or agree to prepare an amendment. But I at least want to introduce this to you and get your general feedback on it, so we know where to go with this.
I have a difficult time getting my arms around, what increasing the density, from 1 unit per 1,000 to 1 unit per 8,000 would do to like impervious coverage and things like that. So I'd be very uncomfortable just reacting to this based on, this overview. And I think you've already said that. Number 3 does seem to make sense, given the acute shortage of housing it seems to make sense to dial that back, and that is common sense. But the rest of it could have far-reaching consequences that I think would have to be explored in detail.
Well, I think on the density limit, Chuck,
Yeah.
since the floor area ratio is currently 1.5, your impervious area coverage is theoretically 100%. So, there wouldn't changing the density wouldn't change the fact that there's 100% impervious area coverage. It may change whether or not there's one or two additional units per lot, depending on the size. And then on number 3, this recommendation I've actually discussed multiple times with developers as well. In order to qualify for certain loan financing on mixed-use developments, they require a maximum of a 20% commercial floor area. And so a lot of developers have told us that the 33% requirement makes it difficult for them to receive certain types of financing from the banks. So I think that's why the EDC's made that recommendation, because I've heard that multiple times.
So that addresses some of my concern about item 2 and additional justification for item 3. Eliminating things like residential parking requirements. Again, I mean, just, stating that as a blunt requirement, I mean, that could have gross impacts, that could be disturbing.
Yeah, this is Lynn. I totally agree with you on number 4, Chuck. I mean, you're packing them in with this, right? That's what you're doing. And you're saying, and you have no place to park.
Right.
So I don't think that really benefits residents. And so I think it's subpar. And I also wonder about, we haven't said anything about the height in these changes. And it says here, building height, 50 by right, up to 70 by special permit.
And that's the current, Lynn, that's the current regulation. That's the existing regulation.
So we might want to look, if we're changing this, we might want to look at changing that too, decreasing it.
Decreasing it wouldn't match the existing built environment.
It wouldn't match what? I'm sorry.
The existing built environment. Sorry, the existing built environment. The buildings mostly within the PV5 in the downtown Pawcatuck area exceed that 50-foot height limit. So if you're lessening it, you're not matching the historic structures that are there.
That's fine, but what about 70 feet?
Well, that's what I mean. 50 to 70. If you're in downtown Pawcatuck or across the river over in Westerly, you're hitting that number quite often if you look at the existing historic structures that are there.
I see.
So
okay,
it would be so the 50% or 50 basically creates a 4-story building, and then the 70 would be 5-story buildings, maybe 6 stories depending on how you jam it. But that matches the existing structures that are down there, especially in that downtown corridor.
In Pawcatuck, 6-story buildings? I can think of 2.
Yeah, and then across in Westerly, it matches. So
I know, but we've got nothing to do with Westerly. It's in a different state.
Yeah.
Well, it's just matching the built environment. So it's a good practice to match.
Yeah. So the EDC certainly isn't coming to us looking to open up this can of worms to have us take away development density or development rights. They're looking, if anything, to loosen it up. And they clearly, have not requested any change in height. But the commercial residential ratio, I think, is a very important one. The density, realistically, if we don't provide parking relief, the density is a moot issue. because your density is going to be limited by what you can park.
Yeah, and
But aren't
if
you setting yourself up for a problem without parking for residential units? How do you address that requirement?
studies show that you don't need it.
These people don't have cars?
Some don't, but what you're allowing is, instead of the amount of cars necessary, or if you're changing your parking ratio that dictates the density of the units, you're now, by reduce or eliminating the minimums, you're making the developer choose what their ideal ratio is. So it becomes a business model. So just by eliminating the minimums doesn't mean they don't build parking. It just means
Okay,
the
so there's
developer
some parking.
chooses.
There'd be a
Correct.
different parking model.
It's not a ban on parking. It's just
Okay,
saying if
gotcha.
you're building a residential structure, you as the developer come to the commission and say, this is what we think our ideal parking ratio would be. And then based off of everything else the commission already has, you can have that conversation and, work back and forth together.
I'm sorry, I misunderstood this. I thought you were deleting parking entirely.
No, this just says that there's no minimum you have to provide for a project. It's up to the individual developer. And this is only for residential because all the PV5 area is in the parking overlay. So you don't have to provide parking for commercial anyways. So this is just for residential.
Okay.
Right, but I mean, it's almost compounded by the fact that you've got the PV5 overlay, because now the commercial space, you don't have to provide any parking. So all those people that are, the 20% or 30, currently 33, but proposed 20% commercial space in that building, they're parking on the street. And then you're going to add residential. And I have to say, Clifton, I mean, when somebody says the studies show, did the studies take place in southeastern Connecticut where there's no mass transit? I mean,
Well, I mean, if you're in downtown Pawcatuck and Mystic, you have 2 mass transit options by the train station.
not to get to Super Stop and Shop. I mean,
that's a different issue, though.
well,
that just
don't
means that
know.
there isn't a grocery store downtown. That's completely separate from the fact that there's parking requirements.
Well, I would just, if you're going to have a car, you got to have a place to park it. And if you can't get to the grocery store, you need a car. So I just, again, when somebody says studies show, where did those studies take place? Like, was it southeastern Connecticut?
I mean, I know Hartford did a very robust study in terms of reducing their parking requirements. So at least you got a few Connecticut examples where municipalities have outright removed all parking minimums. And I haven't heard any of those being unsuccessful.
Hartford is for Connecticut a major city with a whole infrastructure of busing and et cetera, et cetera. I don't know.
I mean, I can provide you the wealth of literature on the topic. Like, I think we can move on from this, but I'm happy to discuss it with the commission.
Yeah, why don't we put some structure? Why don't we put some structure around? I'm starting to see that that a different model, for certain projects would make sense. And I think that item 3, as Francisco said, is a layup, and item 2 is kind of tied to item 4. But why don't we put a little bit more structure around each one of these items? And I would certainly consider moving forward with some of this.
I would consider moving forward with 1, 2, 3. I think structure around number 4 is, I think there should be some kind of minimal stated.
Mhm.
What about a reduction? What about a reduction of the parking requirement instead of removing it?
It's only
I
one per
like
resident.
Lynn's approach, moving forward with 1, 2, and 3,
Okay.
and putting some more structure around number 4.
Yeah.
I'll do my best with that direction and put something together for you to take a look at. Okay.
Thank you for that, Lynn.
Thank you.
All right. So we're doing pretty good here on time. We got through that in an hour, and that's what I was hoping we would be able to do. So now we've got some very important work to do, and maybe we can march right through this, and maybe we're going to have to really argue our way through this. But either way, it's important work to do because going back months now, over a year, we've developed over the course of that time 40 recommended amendments, and we talked about close to 20 of them this evening, 16 at least. But we had 40 that we developed over the past 2 years that we want to revisit and make some decisions about. And as I mentioned, I'm interested in taking a triage approach. And first of all, what do we want to table indefinitely, right? Basically to not advance. So that's where we'll start. And then we'll move on to what do we want to advance potentially with some modification that we've identified. And we're, of course, if you would like to modify any of this, if you have thoughts about anything we put forward and you'd like to speak up, please do so. And then finally, we'll kind of close this out with, what do we feel what do we think we can move forward with as written? And so that's how we will proceed. So let's start with what
It's a lot of
staff-
ground to cover, my friend.
It is, but we're going to do it. We're going to get it done.
Okay.
So staff, Clifton provided me feedback, and Clifton, as needed, if you could weigh in on some of this, I'd appreciate it. I put together a spreadsheet of all recommended amendments, created 3 columns, and asked Clifton to fill it out and to triage it. And so what I've done is I've organized this based upon my feedback from staff, and Clifton worked with staff to sort these and categorize these recommended amendments. So let's move on. So these are amendments that are recommended not to advance as perhaps as currently written or at all in any capacity. And I'll read down this list, and then I'll take a pause. And of course, I've got one more slide to this effect, but I'll read down this list. I'll pause, allow Clifton to weigh in, and then I'd like to hear your thoughts on it. So recommendation 1, increase the freeboard requirement. I think, as you all know, there's been a lot of opposition from the community on this. So we are looking not to advance that recommendation. Recommendation 3 was the transfer of development rights regulation, which would enable development rights to be transferred out of flood hazard areas into other areas. Recommendation 4, accommodate required increases in building elevation. This one we already adopted, and that had to do with exceptions to the building height limit for like chimneys and architectural features. So that we already put back into the regulations. So that's why we don't need to concern ourselves with it. So it's just, we're done. Recommendation 5 is to expand the non-infringement area regulations. Yeah, non-infringement regulations currently apply in your coastal areas in the RC 120. We're looking to potentially expand that to all other waterways across all districts. Recommendation 6 is to require a setback from the coastal jurisdiction line in all AE zone flood hazard areas and not just in the AE coastal flood zone hazard areas, to apply that setback universally. And then recommendation 12 is to improve the protection of trees by requiring the replacement of trees when they are cut down. And so, Clifton, do you want to weigh in on any of this as to reasons why the staff was not comfortable with advancing these?
Yeah, just I think the only one that needs explaining is probably
I get chopped.
Yeah.
5 and 6. In speaking with the zoning enforcement officer, applying these would just astronomically increase the number of variances applied for.
Okay. And how about our recommendation requiring replacement of trees? Anything on that?
I think we captured most of that as part of the landscaping discussion. So with our landscaping requirements, and I think, as we've even discussed tonight, the commission is given the broad ability already to, protect these trees or require the planting of trees. So I think we expanded upon 12 by creating the landscaping requirements and buffering landscaped buffer requirements in a later recommendation.
Agreed. I think R1 was very controversial, and the limit that was set was not scientific. It was like pulled out of the air, and as such, I think has a certain arbitrary element to it that would be easily overturned, and I don't think it's fair just to pull a number out and without some, and especially in an area like this where there's so much scientific evidence, and do something arbitrary. So, but I agree with the others. I think that we've either addressed them or that they're going to be so controversial that none of this will pass.
I think number all three is just too big for this. It's a separate issue. It could be gigantic. So I agree. It doesn't belong here. It's just too big for. Yeah.
Yep. I agree. I think it's outside the scope of what this study can get its arms around.
Yeah.
I've had a lot of feedback on that. A lot of feedback on R1. None of it positive.
Well, I mean, there's your answer.
Okay, but you know what, guys? I have to say, and unfortunately, I don't think there's anybody on the call that was very active in the whole coastal resilience part of our discussions. And I think they'd be floored to think that these are even up for not advancing at this time. So, I think we may not have reached perfection, but if you wait to reach perfection, you're never going to make a change. That's the bottom line. So what is the free board? We went a little above what is required. And I see no problem with that. I mean, we don't want to have to do this again in the next 5 years when things, change yet again, we have more flooding, et cetera. So I don't understand that at all. I can understand the R3, the adopt of a transfer of development right regulation, because I think it was very confusing for people, even people on the commission. I think it was very confusing how that worked and to visualize how it would work. So I can certainly support R3 going away. If we all recall, there was a lot of discussion about required increase in building elevation, and we were promised that we would look into this more and it would come back within a couple of months, and that has not happened. But again, the reason we kept it the same was because we were looking for perfection. We weren't willing to make a small change. We wanted to make it perfect, like all the I's and all the T's are crossed, and that is not how you advance change. That's just not acceptable. If we're waiting for perfection, nothing ever changes. The non-infringement areas were key to our coastal resilient discussion, as well as R6, the require setback for all flood zones. Those were major points. So I feel like I just, cannot see R5, R6, or R1 changing. I mean, I can't see that at all. We spent weeks on it, and we had very, very robust discussions. So, at that point, I didn't hear anything from staff saying, "Oh no, that's not good." And
But there
we
has
are
been,
experts
I know, I
on-
spoke
there has been a substantial period that's elapsed since then, and a lot of feedback, and the non-infringement areas render huge areas, undevelopable that aren't affected now, and this impacts a lot of people, and a lot of people have fed back. Same thing with freeboard requirement. So I mean, part of
I guess you have to decide.
part of the process,
We have to.
part of the process
Mhm.
is feedback, and we now have the benefit of feedback, and the staff has gotten significant feedback. So I think that's got to be considered, or you're going to get an overwhelming pushback on this stuff that's going to be a huge impediment to adopting any of it. And
The-
We had the
as
experts
was said,
on the
as was said, I
call.
think by Gary, as was said by Gary earlier, and I'm sorry for interrupting, but as said was by Gary earlier, some of these require much more work, and are studies unto themselves. And although a robust discussion was held, there was not detailed studies of how much land was impacted by, say, R5. And if you did that, you'd see that it's huge, and not everybody is even aware of that. And once they become aware of it, the pushback is going to be even larger. So I think that I understand what you're saying, and there was robust discussions around all of this, but I think the feedback on some of these things, now that those who are impacted are aware of it, is going to preclude any of this from advancing.
So I have to say, none of the things that were proposed, they were all about coastal resilience. It was about keeping, the environment and our waters, etc. And, I guess that's not a priority. What I'm hearing from you is that's not a priority for the town of Stonington. For the town of Stonington, what's the priority is if somebody owns a lot, they want what they want. And it doesn't matter what effects it has on our coastal resilience as a town. That's really.
I think
The-
that's unfair. I think that's grossly unfair, and I think it ignores the tremendous amount of feedback that you got from people that had much broader considerations than self-interest.
Yeah,
and I also think that other items have been brought up. Let's take R5, for example, that there's a wetland setback in town, and this is largely redundant. It's regulated now, and it just adds another layer onto the approval process for someone to move forward with the project. So I understand your concern, but I don't necessarily agree with your comments.
And if some of these actually are if staff can't do their jobs right because of these things, that's hurting the environment. I can make the case too. So it's, and that's what they're saying by giving this feedback. So
But staff doing their job, Gary, is not a reason not to have a zoning reg. It's a reason to look at staffing, either increasing it because there's more work to be done. But it's not a reason not to have a regulation. That's false logic right there.
No,
I'm
I don't
sorry.
agree. 'Cause
I
you can
believe-
put some pie in the sky regulations that no one could enforce. I mean, I don't know where that line is, but I don't agree with that.
I think that each one of these areas requires a separate study. Insufficient work was done in each of these areas to write a regulation that really makes sense and is fairly constructed. They're all beyond the scope. I know we had these discussions, and it's good we did. But each one of these areas could be a study unto itself, and would require a study if you were going to put together a thoughtful, well-constructed regulation that was going to do something. And I wouldn't be opposed to moving with some of these as separate studies, but I don't think we did anywhere near enough work to say that the freeboard requirement that we established was scientific, it was fair, and it was justified. I don't think as I feel the same way about the non-infringement regulation. We didn't do enough work. Not that it wouldn't be worthwhile to study that area and to try to put together a carefully thought out, reasonable regulation, but I don't think enough work was done. And I don't think that you could, from what was done, as extensive as it was, you could fairly move forward with a regulation that wouldn't easily be overturned. That's just my thought. So while I'm not opposed to revisiting these as separate studies, and I think some of them bear, some of our discussions prove that some of them would be worth pursuing. That we don't have enough information to write a regulation at this time, and if we think we do, we're fooling ourselves.
Well, we could take the other approach and say, we're going to adopt these regulations, and if somebody wants to overturn them, they can do an independent study and come to us and prove that these are not appropriate regulations. And that would be the better way to go. If somebody
I
feels,
disagree. I think it's arbitrary. You just defined what an arbitrary decision is, and my opinion is that anything we did in any one of these categories would be arbitrary. We just don't have enough scientific information. We haven't studied it enough, and each of these areas was actually beyond the scope of the study. And we didn't have the resources. We didn't have the resources to go into these areas to the extent that's necessary to establish a fair and reasonable regulation. I think anything you do, based on what we did would be arbitrary.
But Chuck, it wasn't arbitrary. We had experts on multiple calls telling us what needed to be done, why it needed to be done, citing studies, citing what other towns have done, et cetera, et cetera. Now, I'm not an expert, and I'm not claiming to be, but we had multiple calls with the experts. So I guess, I'm not sure what else we would have wanted to do. And if we felt that we needed an independent study, we wasted our time of the experts and all of those meetings we were at. And now what's being proposed is that we just don't go forward, not that we go back and we try to maybe limit some of the changes we are suggesting, but again, waiting for perfection before we make a change which is not the way to get results. So
I would feel more comfortable identifying within this list what areas are worth, would be worth pursuing as independent studies. And I would just ask you, from your recollection, to cite who was the outside expert that talked to us about increased freeboard requirement. We never had one, and we had flood limits, we had maps of flood limits, we had sea level rise people, but by and large, the FEMA data is what everybody relies upon. It's what the insurance companies rely upon. And do we have enough scientific evidence to make a scientific change on R1? And I just use that as an example. No. Could we? Yes. I think if we did additional work, there could be a sensible regulation that's written. So maybe we ought to prioritize this list, Lynn. It would address my concerns and yours, and we could circle back on it, and we could have a regulation that we could defend.
I really was referring to R5 and R6 when we were talking about experts and in those discussions. I definitely understand that the freeboard requirement, we went back and forth on different proposals and we settled on one. But that's part of discussion. You go back and forth and you settle on something. I'm not sure you need scientific information for that. But R5 and R6, Chuck, we had, so many people on those calls that are well versed in this area. And we looked at map upon
No, I know we had a lot
upon
of subject area. We had a lot of interest. But each one of these areas, in my opinion, requires a study. It's a
But then
detailed
why
enough
didn't you say
study
that
to.
at the beginning? We should have just said it at the beginning then.
Then we have the
I'm
benefit.
sorry.
We have the benefit of feedback, and a lot of it comes to the staff, and a lot of time has elapsed since these discussions were held. So I would leave it at that, and I would favor prioritizing this list and circling back on these subjects, because I think some of them are worthy of further study and worthy of regulation rewrite, but I don't think we have enough information to do it well and do it at this time. And I would leave my comments at that.
Okay, and I do think we need to move forward because I have another slide to this effect. Recommendation 22, to provide more flexibility in open space development regulations to allow for greater diversity of housing types. This was the idea we had regarding pre-approved housing, that if we came up with a pre-approved housing typology, then we could allow townhouses and duplexes in open space developments. And it was a very similar approach for recommendation 24, is to revise the attached housing standards to be less restrictive by allowing a higher density and reducing buffers and all that sort of thing. Recommendation 25 is to make the congregate living facility standards less restrictive, and that primarily involved reducing the required buffers for those and also loosening up the regulations in some other ways. 27 is to extend the look-back period of the substantial improvement definition, and this is relevant to your flood zone and ties right back into the freeboard discussion we just had. The look-back period is the period you look back to determine the value of improvements to a home. If you exceed 50%, then you have to improve it to full compliance, which usually means you have to raise the home. It's currently a 1-year look back. We talked about extending it beyond 1 year. And we've, just like the freeboard requirement, we've received a lot of opposition from the community on this one.
Received a lot of opposition from the building department on this, who has lived through a look back period that was longer and lived through a period of a look back period that's shorter. and there's been greater reinvestment in the latter. So the building official was vehemently opposed to the look back period. This is what I'm saying in terms of feedback that we've gotten that is extensive and focused, and it makes sense.
And then finally on this slide, and this is the last of the recommendations that have been recommended not to advance, is to amend the regulations of the Maritime Heritage District to remove a lot of the floating zone language that enabled the creation of the district. So this change really is just cleanup, would just be cleanup, and getting rid of some dead weight in the regs. Really not looking to change how anything works with respect to the MHD. And I think, Clifton, I imagine you had concerns that it would be in some way adversely impactful to approved master plans, but I'll leave it to you to weigh in on this one and on us pulling back from recommendation 22, 24, and 25, if you want to weigh in on those.
Sure. Just to clarify, 22 and 24, it's not that staff doesn't support. Those are 22 would be, it takes a lot of effort in order to create the pre-approved housing program itself. So we thought it was just too much work at this stage, because bringing it to the public, not knowing what that pre-approved program would look like. Number 24, again, not that staff doesn't support, but it's, we saw that one be slightly controversial in the public hearing, in the public meetings we did have. So in the sake of things that I saw being extremely controversial or could potentially delay or outright, hinder our work, I'd rather push that off to a later date. 25, we actually passed already in the form of a amendment that came from a private developer. So we just don't have to add that one. And then, yeah, like you said, Francisco, 34, the view from it, and I spoke to the Mystic Seaport about it, is that they're content and comfortable with the things the way they are. They don't want to see their floating zone process change in any way. And they're the only ones that the MHD supports, so.
Okay. Okay.
So I'd like to understand what the building inspector, what was his opposition to the back period exactly?
The
reinvestment. Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was going to say, one, how it's calculated. Instead of just doing it on a year-by-year basis, you basically have to do a lot of extra work over the length of time, whatever that time frame is. And then the
extra work for who?
For staff
who?
that we don't have the staff for.
Or... Okay.
And then the other feedback on that was that the existing look back period helped spur some redevelopment or investment into existing properties, and they didn't want to see that change. That's actually what the Economic Development Commission said as well. They've provided extensive feedback saying that changing the look back period would have detrimental effects to investment in the community.
Reinvestment.
Correct.
That was the principal objection that the building official talked to me about, and there's scientific evidence to show that reinvestment under the former regulation and reinvestment under the current regulation, they're dramatically different.
Well, certainly, but that's not what the look back period is all about. The look back period is about making sure that the homes are meeting the requirements necessary for today's environment change. It's not about making it easy. It's not about it. Of course, there's going to be more investment if it's only 1 year back period. It's cheaper for the person. That's not the purpose. If that was the purpose, you wouldn't have any look back period. I mean,
I
that's,
disagree with that. I think that's ridiculous.
oh my gosh,
I
and we went
I
from
think that
town to town to town asking what the look back periods were. We didn't take the longest look back period. We didn't take the shortest look back period. I mean, I'm just not sure why. I'm sorry. We didn't take the longest. We didn't take the shortest. Of course, the shorter look back period is going to mean that people will invest more, but they won't bring it up to the standards. I mean that's
what's the scientific, then let me
I-
just ask you this. What's the scientific basis for the period we did pick? There isn't one. It's arbitrary.
oh my gosh,
And
it's not.
if you
Nothing
look at
is
history,
scientific
if you
about
look at
it.
history, you
Mhm.
get more improvement, more reinvestment, more sustainability in the shorter look back period than you do in the long one. And that's the fact. And yet we're gonna arbitrarily change it. And arbitrary is the word with a capital A. So that's I mean, it made a lot of sense. I wish the building official had spoken to the Planning and Zoning Commission, but he reached out to me right after this was drafted and made an emphatic statement and plea not to change it. So that's just the fact on R27. And in fairness to you, you didn't have the benefit of that, but the rest of us did. So, or some of us did. And that's what contributed to this not advancing, at least in my book, or should not advance.
Well, that in the community. I think this is one of those, we did it, and I was for it, but listen, I live in Lord's Point, and I heard it, and I'll leave it at that.
Oh yeah.
So and that's what the community wanted, So I was for the 3-year look back, but hearing from the community was more feedback, and it was like, okay.
I think we should move forward. I think there's
Okay.
more discussion that needs to be
There
had around
certainly
these
is.
issues, but I hear what everybody's saying.
Okay.
The full commission will need to consent around this.
Yeah.
Let's talk about amendments that have been impacted or are potentially impacted by recent legislation, and it looks like the governor kind of gave us a pass on at least one of these. First of all, what did pass is that single-family homes are no longer exempt from coastal site plan review, and this was a recommendation we had made. We were ahead of the curve on this. Recommendation 2, Public Act 25-33, which was signed into law by the governor, removes the single-family home exemption, and that is effective very soon, October 1st, 2025. So we are compelled to move forward with recommendation 2, which we had proposed doing exactly that. Recommendation 29 was to expand the range of permitted uses in commercial industrial zones. And this is something we do plan to advance. Public Act 2549, which most people know as House Bill 5002, was just vetoed by the governor, and that would have required 2 to 9 unit residential development to be allowed by right in commercial zones. And it looks like we dodged that bullet. That they may go to special session to make amendments to that bill. But I think it's very unlikely that this moves forward because this is one of the things that sunk the bill. So point being, with recommendation 29, we are going to move that forward, and that has some very kind of surgical, very precise changes to uses allowed in commercial industrial zones. And I think it's well vetted, and everyone agreed that all those recommendations were a good idea. Recommendation 36 involves a fairly substantial update of Section 13 of the off-street parking regulations. reorganized, rewritten much of that section. Once again, Public Act 2549, House Bill 5002 would have removed any parking requirement for residential uses under most conditions. There were caveats surrounding that. But like I said, the governor vetoed that. So there are no implications at this time for recommendation 36. So we really have to move forward with R2. And it's my recommendation, supported by staff, that we move forward with recommendation 29 and 36. All right. Any questions or comments?
I have heard that there's going to be a special session at the end of September on 2549. And I don't know what's going to happen there, but that it's going to be revisited. And the proponents seem adamant that you know, they can make some compromise with the front office to get it approved. I'm not sure that it wasn't that it didn't tank a lot harder than that, you know, because the governor waited till the last day and then vetoed it, you know.
Right.
Yeah, a lot of that text is going to come back in some way, shape, or form. There weren't too many things that were that controversial that I don't see the governor not signing the next one.
Some form of it. You're right. Some form of it.
Yeah.
So there'll be a negotiation, and we're going to get some of it. So we should probably, you know, be in a position where you know, we can, because that's right around the time that all of this will be formulated for public hearing, and you know, I don't know what we do if it's delivered to us at that point and we've just set it aside.
Well, if it is passed into law as it's currently written, and there are a lot of big assumptions here, they will likely set an effective date that's a year out. And so I think we need to move forward with what we've drafted and not get deterred by what may or may not happen.
Very good point. Very good point. I think it's mindful to be aware of what's coming at us, but when you don't know, you know, and there'll likely be a grace period on adoption. We're better off dealing with what we know than what we guess at this point.
Okay. And any other questions or comments regarding these three recommended amendments? Okay, good. Let's move forward. So amendments that may require either consolidation, because we have a couple of amendments that are, each of them are trying to do something similar, and it may make sense just to bundle them, or modification in some capacity. And I've got 2 slides worth of these. So first, we have 3 separate recommended amendments that are trying to do really good things with respect to encouraging sustainable development. R11 is a sustainability incentive that really it bundles a lot of different things into an incentive that allows a developer to earn points that enables them to cover more of a lot. Now, all of this is contingent upon you switching from FAR to lot coverage, because in order to have an incentive, you have to have something to give away. And so the incentive here is this: if you provide sustainable elements, you get to cover more of the lot. And it's a very rational basis, of course, because you know, the extra lot coverage is offset by all these other forms of you know, sustainable development. R16 and R17 were kind of carve-outs from that. It's separate because we weren't sure if we were going to move forward with R11, because R11 is like a big incentive program. R16 and R17 were very specific and targeted. R16, a green roof incentive. R17, porous, pervious, permeable pavement. So the way to approach this is, if we like recommendation 11, I think we can just get rid of 16 and 17. We can leave those behind, and because R11 really, it covers all this ground. And if for some reason we think that R11 is too robust or complicated or whatever the issue may be, And we might choose to keep 16 and 17 because they're very simple and straightforward. So that's what's under consideration here, and I'd love to get some feedback on this.
I think R11 is scientific and not arbitrary, and I think you can put specific criteria around it, and it makes all the sense in the world. And it does substantially enhance sustainability.
I think most importantly, these are all incentive based and they're not requirements. And so we're not putting the onus on anyone to do any form of sustainable development, but we're creating opportunities for it.
Right.
And anyone else have thoughts on how we approach this?
No, that makes sense to me. I mean, if the R11 encompasses the other two, yeah.
Okay. Okay. Now, once again, this is contingent upon, as written, it's contingent upon moving forward with R15, which is switching to a lot coverage standard, right? Because that's what the incentive allows.
Yeah,
for.
you couldn't administer without that.
That's correct. That's correct. So that needs to be understood. So that this would all have to be packaged together.
So much of the changes in the regulations are contingent upon recommended amendment 15.
Yes. Yes. Okay. I'll go ahead. We have one more to this effect. One more slide, at least three additional recommended amendments. R10 is to provide more flexibility in the height and location of ground-mounted small solar energy systems. As you recall, the current limit is 15 feet, which precludes being able to deploy it over a parking lot. And we talked about raising to 20. And then Clifton provided some interesting feedback. Should we consider limiting that 20-foot increase to only systems that are deployed over parking areas?
The basis for that, the basis for that is there's no real justification for having solar panels 20 feet in the air if you're not putting something under it. So I
think it was a very good point that you had raised, Clifton, which is exactly why I wanted to talk about it here. Does anyone else have thoughts on that?
We also
it makes sense
talked
what
about
Clifton
when we were
says.
talking about the solar energy systems, we talked about adding something having to do with drainage onto other people's properties, etc., and that you need to have an engineering plan. Was that incorporated into this?
No, and I'll tell you why. And so we talked about that as a potential issue. All right, that was raised as a potential issue or concern. We did not agree to add any additional requirements. What I promised to do is to look into that. And so I did look into it. And it is absolutely correct that solar panels and a deployment of solar panels concentrates runoff. That's absolutely correct. It doesn't increase volume, but it concentrates runoff. But it is no more adversely impactful than any other type of accessory structure, whether it be a shed, a garage, or a house. And we don't have specific engineering standards for addressing runoff other than best practices. And as Chuck talked about earlier, you can't divert runoff directly onto an adjacent property. So there are already well-established controls for stormwater runoff onto properties, and solar panels wouldn't need to be treated any differently from any other type of accessory structure.
The proper place for a regulation to calculate the impact of concentration, and like I said, it doesn't increase volume. It increases concentration. The proper place for that would be in the technical standards that are published, and enforced in other regulations, not the zoning regulations. So I do think we could make a recommendation that be looked at and included in the technical standards, so that it would be taken into consideration and our concerns could be addressed there. Town engineer is the repository for the technical standards, and I think would welcome that input.
Okay. Lynn, does that sufficiently address your concerns or answer your question?
I guess so, yep.
Okay. All right, the next item, R23, we had proposed reducing the lot size requirement for duplexes and triplexes. And what staff actually recommends is outright removing any additional lot size requirement for those. And so the way this works is we had tied this to pre-approved housing type, so that if you had a pre-approved housing type, you could then build a duplex on the minimum lot size requirement for a single family home. But you could only do so if it were a pre-approved housing type, which is connected to the other recommendation that we agreed not to advance at this time. What staff is recommending is we don't tie that to a pre-approved housing type. We just remove the additional lot size requirement entirely. And Lynn, I know you did have concerns about this one as well.
Yeah, I have major concerns about this one, and I'm sure that there was feedback about this, especially now that it would change everything with staff's recommendation, that there's no set architectural review or anything like that. We had a lot of feedback. You put a lot of different pictures up, what was acceptable, what wasn't acceptable. It was very clear that the only reason things were acceptable was because of the look and the design. So, if you're not going to do one, you can't do the other, as far as I'm concerned. So we should just leave it the way it's always been.
Anyone else have thoughts on this? Should we kind of bundle this recommendation?
I'd have to think about it. I don't have any thoughts initially.
Yeah.
I would tend to agree with Lynn on this.
Yeah, I fully and fundamentally disagree with the notion that a duplex or a triplex is 2 times or 3 times as worse as a single family, which is what the language implies. So having this requirement at all is insanity to me as a planner.
Well, I may disagree with the ratios. I may disagree with those ratios, but it would be hard for me to say that it's not a more intense use of the land to have a duplex on the same size lot as a single family home. It's hard to say that one would be, one wouldn't be more intense than the other. So I'd be willing to look at the ratios, and the ratios I think are excessive, 2 and 3 times. It may be ridiculously excessive. So maybe that's what we've got to look at. But I don't really have I don't have any science around this. So I think, in order for me to support a change, there'd have to be some scholarship around why.
Right, and we don't have time for that scholarship, so we shouldn't make any changes. That's kind of the course of action that we're taking. So, I think it has to stay the way it is.
I think it should stay the way it is until we have some science around it or some scholarship around it, and I'd be open to that consideration. But I have the same arbitrary objection if
I
we
think
just all of a sudden say,
I think the scholarship needs to be around making the case that there is an intensity difference between two different types of residential uses. So it would be, because it doesn't resemble that in real life. So I don't know how to even approach providing scholarship on something that's just a basis.
well, for instance, is if you have two families living on a lot that a single family would live on, isn't it likely that you'd have twice as many cars and therefore require
Potentially,
twice as
but
much pavement? Twice as much
potentially
pavement.
you could also have this.
So these are the types of things that I could easily be convinced that if the numbers support something different than I just don't know that. I don't have a good feel for the data, Clifton. Not that I disagree with it. I think the ratios just off the top of my head are ridiculous. That a duplex has to be twice as big. I don't think that at all, because I've seen highly developed suburban neighborhoods with duplex houses on tiny lots, and they work. But
I mean, I'd point to the majority of downtown Pawcatuck, which all of those homes are either duplexes or triplexes. But I would say, to your first comment about parking and or impervious area, that's why we would be changing to a lot coverage system. So that way it'd be equal across the board. So, the only intensity that people may claim is parking or traffic on the roads, but it's still a residential area. Some people have 3 or 4 car garages and 6 kids, versus a duplex might be only 2 bedrooms and have 1 child. It's when you talk about residential, the structure of how families are built are so drastically different that you can't put them in these boxes where you say that because this is a duplex, this could be more intense or more different than any other single family dwelling, because
let me say that I would be
familial
open.
makeups is so different.
I would be open to, information on this and information that would support your position, but I'd have to see it. I really would. And it's just that it's how is it impacted by coverage, and maybe some examples, of where it works, and that would be enough for me.
But at this point, Chuck, we have had public meetings where there has been a lot of negative comments about changing this reg unless it was associated with an accepted architectural design. You're not going to change that. You've had the negative comments. We didn't go in saying we were going to do this or we're going to do that. So I don't see how logically you can say independently we're now going to ignore those comments and we're gonna just change the lot sizes, etc. I mean, it was very clear.
I hope
people wanted.
What I said was not interpreted as ignoring anything. So I don't like that word, and I think it's unfair to raise it. So I'm not ignoring anything, Lynn. I recall exactly what we've been through. But what I'm saying is, if I had more information, I have an open mind about things. So I'm not saying that I'm ignoring anything. So please don't insinuate that. That's a very strong word.
Can I make?
It still stands, Chuck, that we had a lot of negative comments from our public meetings regarding this.
Agreed.
And you can't. I don't believe that it's to the best interest of the town to change the formula, right? Without going back to another public meeting with the exact same topics and being very upfront of this is what we're going to do.
But you're not changing the
So we
formula.
had-
It already exists. It's already existent in the built
No.
environment. It's not different.
Well, what we're changing is the lot size. What you're suggesting is a change in the lot size requirements for duplexes and triplexes. That's what you're saying. That's what you're
Correct, because that
suggesting,
matches
and
the
what I'm
built
saying-
environment. There has not been a good justification beyond the taste police coming in and saying they don't like architecture to justify why this change shouldn't happen. I would encourage you to go look and find other examples across the state of municipalities that have this type of regulation, because they'll be, if any, few and far between.
Yeah, I think the original regulation was arbitrary. You know, what was
Yeah,
what
well,
was the
because it's
justification for it?
because it's a taste police thing. There's no actual change or difference in what a duplex or triplex looks like, except for potentially architecturally. So people wanted to push away the idea of that being next to a single family because they didn't like how it looked, and that's the only feedback that we received throughout any of the public relation or public engagement process was between either the look of how they were constructed, hence creating the pre-approved housing program, or the fact that they didn't like how it looked, so they wanted to have buffers in it across the surrounding property. So it's really just a taste police thing, not made in any basis of fact or reality. It doesn't match the built environment across Stonington. So it is an arbitrary regulation that should be removed. And I haven't heard a good enough reason personally to justify why it shouldn't be removed.
Well, it's kind of like the floorboard discussion that we had. The only reason that people don't want the floorboard is because of, the value of their property, which is not supposed to come into play in any of these discussions. But we received negative feedback, and so we're not going forward with it. And this is the exact same argument.
Lynn, we received scientific feedback.
No,
It
you
was
didn't
negative,
receive
but
scientific.
it was scientific. There was a basis for it, and on some of those. What do you mean floorboard? Do you mean freeboard?
Freeboard. She means freeboard.
Freeboard.
Yeah, the increased
I meant
freeboard. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I wonder if we can
All right.
agree on
Anyways,
this,
all right.
because
Why don't we agree? Why don't we agree on there needs to be additional discussion? We're stuck on this. We have an hour. We have an hour to get through a bunch of other issues, and we're not going to get to them tonight, which is our last session with you if we don't keep this moving. And I agree. I agree. We have to come back to this.
But rather than just throw this in the bin with everything else, what I'm suggesting is this. I think much of this is contingent upon the original idea that we had that I think we agreed was a fairly good solution to link this, to attach it to pre-approved housing type or requirement. Because I think that addresses a lot of the concerns about what's going to be built on that lot. And if we have a pre-approved housing type, we can be assured that it'll be something appropriate to the size of the lot. And so I think that this recommendation is very much tied to a couple others, like for attached housing and for the open space subdivisions that we agreed not to move forward with, primarily because it really involved a lot more work in order to develop the pre-approved housing catalog or portfolio, right? We've talked about how we need a separate study or really need to hire an architect to develop that, and that's going to require some community engagement and some diligence to come up with a catalog of pre-approved housing types in order to build a program. So maybe we can agree that all of these items attached to this idea of pre-approved housing is really still in play, that we can't move forward with them yet because they're contingent upon first doing that additional work. But maybe we can make a recommendation that we table them and that the town seek to get some funding to support doing work in this area. And then at that point, if a pre-approved housing catalog is developed, then we could reintroduce these recommended amendments that are associated with it. And that way we're not completely abandoning this idea, and we're also not moving forward without some sort of provisions surrounding it.
So this preserves the good discussion that took place around a lot of these areas that Lynn accurately pointed out. There was a good discussion around freeboard. There was a good discussion around, look back period. There was a lot of input. There was a lot of interest. So these ideas were raised and developed in the final assessment, perhaps not well enough developed to be codified. And this is the same thing. We all like the idea of the architectural, prototypes and how that would be helpful in creating tastefully done projects. This fits into the same category as some of the other things we talked about that should be prioritized and categorized for future study. These are ideas that we looked at that we generally have a very positive feel for and should be looked at in the near term, and somehow try to get funding to move it forward as a package or move selected elements forward as a package. I just raised that item again because I don't want to make it look like we're throwing the baby out with the bathwater here. It's just that some of these ideas were beyond the scope of this. And in fairness to you, Francesca, we looked at this and you were helpful in developing these ideas beyond the scope of the study that you were contracted for. But it's not thorough enough to write a regulation around at this particular point in time without additional funds to more fully develop it. This is a perfect example of that. I think the others fit into it the same way, but that's just my opinion. But I think that out of this list can come a prioritized list, which includes some of Lynn's concerns, this idea, and until the study's done, perhaps we shouldn't do anything with it, until it's more fully developed. Anyway,
Okay.
at this point, I think we have to.
I think we have some agreement then on how we'll treat this, right? We'll make a recommendation that it be advanced via a study that would develop design standards, and then at that point, it would be we'd bring it back.
Yes, I think a lot of these areas fit into this category. This one being one of them.
Okay. All right. Very good. Because
I don't want to confuse it. I'm just going to say, and again, anything we can do to encourage duplexes and triplexes being built will help with the housing problem we have in Stonington. And that's it.
Okay. Thank you, Gary.
Thanks, Gary.
Okay. I believe I have some direction on that. So let's move on to recommendation 38. And this may be a very similar discussion. So this involves our buffering and screening requirements, which I do hope we can move forward with this recommendation more or less as written. However, staff does recommend that we remove the buffer requirements for duplexes. And we had significantly reduced those requirements from anywhere from 25 to 50 feet down to 10 or 15 feet, depending on the zone. And also the screening requirements for ADUs. And so I'm interested in hearing from you. I know, Lynn, this is an area that you felt very strongly about.
Yeah, I mean, again, I don't understand why staff is making this recommendation. What is the justification? We went through this. We substantially reduced. We had a long discussions about it. What's the justification here?
The justification, like I've been saying, is that the general public, the couple people that have said it, and the one or two commissioners that have said it, are only basing their opinions on duplexes and triplexes based on the architectural or site layout of it, not the use itself. Therefore, it's completely irrelevant to, bring in the discussion of something that, you're going to shield it by a buffer requirement. You're going to shield a use, or you're going to say the lot has to be twice or three times as big because you don't like the fact of the type of house. And Gary just said that if we're trying to build more housing in town, which the commission has largely agreed, we do need housing solutions. The commission is also equally not making the most simple, quick and easy solution to create that housing at a minimal scale. We're not talking about large apartment complexes. We're talking about a single family to a duplex, or a single family with an ADU, or an empty lot to a duplex or triplex. These are all simple, very benign changes to the zoning regulations that don't need to be changed in any way. They don't need to be buffered. Residential is residential, and it makes no sense that we're singling out these type of housing formats and not doing the same for single family residential. So either you do it for one or you do it for all.
I specifically on the ADUs, I think it was 2 years ago one came before the zoning board, and I was in shock. I think we had like 15 approved in 5 years or something. It was like, what was the even point of having that? I mean, they're a great idea, but if the
because the regulations as they were too strict, that made it almost impossible for anyone want to build them. So when you're saying you need additional buffers, you need architectural review, you need twice or three times the lot size in the zone where none of the vacant properties in those zones are at that size, you're basically just eliminating it for the sake of it, but using a clever loophole to do so. You're just saying you don't like the use, or you don't like this type of residential. For whatever reason, the commission back in whatever time that this was passed made that decision actively to say, we're going to try to make it impossible to build this type of housing. And so that's why we have these larger lot sizes. But when you actually go around the existing built environment of, even downtown Mystic, downtown Pawcatuck, the places where you'd like to encourage this development, the historical houses that are there are duplexes, triplexes, or even multifamily. And nobody has a problem with those as they exist now. So why are we trying to say that new development of it is different in any way, shape, or form? It's not. It needs to be changed. It needs to be completely removed altogether.
You raise a good point. You raise a very good point.
But we did.
It's well
we
stated.
did make it. We did make it easier. We did not ignore these regulations. To go from 50 feet to 0 is just too large a change. We did not ignore anything. And also, having an ADU is not impossible and has never been impossible. And I highly doubt that you have any evidence to say that people haven't come forward to
that's not
do
true.
this.
The last meeting
That's not true.
I got the whole table. It was unanimous. Oh my God, you really don't want ADUs in this community. It was 5 people at the table,
Right.
and 4 said that.
I mean, we made him pay for a public hearing to build a 400 square foot structure inside an existing garage. I mean, it's completely insane to say that you don't like something so much you're going to throw every stop at it to make it almost impossible to build. So the regulations as they were extremely difficult to get an ADU through. We have proposed and have changed so far to make it a little bit easier, but I mean, it still should be a by right use. It should not go through a site plan application. It should not go through a public hearing. It doesn't make sense why it
permit,
should.
right?
It shouldn't go through a special permit. It shouldn't
Right.
even come before the commission. The same way that other duplexes, as they are allowed by right, don't come before the commission at all. So again, you're singling out individual uses for no residential uses for no reason. It should be just allowed by right across the board. This shouldn't be that difficult.
Well, once again, this was not part of the discussions that we've had. And, I think it's very late in the game to say, okay,
I've said this
you
every
know,
single step of the way.
and we've disagreed with you every single step of the way, and we came up with a compromise. And I'm think that we should stick to the decisions and the proposals that we made when there were, you know, more commissioners online, et cetera, et cetera. I'm just flabbergasted that we're going through this based on these kind of arguments at this point. We've already heard this, and we came to a decision. And I'm not hearing anything more compelling than what was said before when we came to our decisions. We could go through every single reg, every single one now, and re-debate and rediscuss what changes that we proposed. But I don't know why we're picking on
I don't
a
think we
few
ever,
of them.
Lynn, I don't think we ever approached any of this with the idea in mind that 100% of what was discussed, you know, it would be ridiculous to say that 100% of what was developed along the way is going to make it through to the end. There's going to be some screening process. There's going to be something that falls by the wayside. And some of these things are interrelated. Some of these things are, you know, like the duplex housing is related to the housing types that we talked about developing architectural review. Some of these things are linked, and you know, so don't be overly harsh on anyone having an opinion at this point as we're sorting through these things. That, you know, everybody has an opinion. We respect your opinion. I certainly am open to your comments and suggestions, but you know, this is still a debate, and we're sorting this out. So, you know, and this is part of the process.
And I appreciate that. But I think the difference is saying we're not going to make a change, right? We're not going to go forward with the recommendation. We're going to leave that reg alone. We're not ready. Versus we made a recommendation, we had a thorough discussion about it, we made a recommendation, and now instead of just saying, okay, we're not ready to go forward with that recommendation for whatever reason, so we're going to take it off the block, and instead of having 40 changes, we're going to have 35. What this is no, we're going to make a different change at this state of the game. And I'm not understanding that at all, because we could go through every single reg and we could do that. We could say, no, now we're going to make a different change.
You're acting in that with that dialogue as if there's no rationale for this. There's a rationale, and the rationale would have to be presented. So I think we've discussed this. I'm sorry that we don't have all night to spend on the phone with each other, but we've still got an awful lot more to go through here, and it's not gonna get due consideration if we're doing it at 11 o'clock at night.
Let's agree to do this. Recommendation 38 is fairly expansive, and it makes a lot of important changes, and these are 2 items amongst 20 or so that this recommendation would impact, and I think all for the better. Can we agree that we're going to move this recommendation forward, and that this issue could be revisited at any point? We're not going to set it in stone, right? It's going to be written on paper and on screen. And perhaps when there's follow-up work done regarding pre-approved housing types, this issue is somewhat linked to that. This can be revisited then. But I think it's really important that we move recommendation 38 forward, because it makes substantial changes that are really, really important across a number of different types of uses. And I think it takes the whole buffer area requirement, which is completely unwieldy right now and unreasonable, and turns it into something that will be effective for you.
I think that's a good approach for tonight.
Okay. All right, we'll do that. Okay, the next, and I suppose I was a little misleading when I said triage, because that's supposed to be 3 categories. So this is more of like quintage. I did flag items, amendments that I'm not certain that you want to move forward with them as written. You may or may not want to consider them further, and they're just 3 items, and here they are. So recommendation 18, and maybe you can correct me right now and say, absolutely, we're all on the same page with this. Let's go forward. There's nothing to discuss here. Recommendation 18, we talked about a little bit earlier. Lynn reminded us of the fact that we'd done work in this area. It is, as you remember, is to rezone several areas across the town to reduce lot size nonconformity, and for no other reason. And we were very surgical and precise in that effort. And almost every single one of those areas has either 100%, somewhere between 80 to 100% of lot size nonconformity. And we would rezone it to areas that are to zones that are immediately adjacent. And so it's a very defensible recommendation. Recommendation 19 is would adjust frontage and setback standards to reduce those standards, to bring them closer in closer alignment to what we've actually found when we did a bunch of sampling and measuring of lot sizes and frontage and setbacks across the various zones. And so the changes that we've recommended are based upon what we see actually existing in the built environment. And then recommendation 20 is to rename and merge the residential districts. And so as you'll recall, it taking the RA20 and RA15 and merging them down to an RA15 and so forth. These are all connected, and they could all be done together, and it would be a fairly substantial change. They could be done independently. None of these are contingent upon the other being done. But before we agree to move forward, I think these are all very substantial changes, and I think we need to have agreement. And so if you can give me any direction this evening, that's fine. If you tell me we really need to convene with the full commission to make a decision on these items, then I'll just put them in that category, that items that require additional discussion or consideration.
I think you need the full commission's opinion on all of this, but
Yeah.
and it's unfortunate that the attendance is so low tonight, because we get a lot of meaningful input from all our commissioners, and as I say frequently, I appreciate the attendance of everybody when they can. But I think that we receive significant public pushback on like frontage and side yard setbacks. People didn't want to look out the window and see somebody building something right in their side yard, or adjacent to their side yard. And we got a lot of pushback on the non-conforming thing, which was hard to believe, because it would have helped a lot of people if they had become conforming. But a lot of pushback on that. And likewise, the renaming and merging residential districts. I don't see any of these issues moving forward without additional consideration. So that's my personal opinion, but I would need to hear from the full commission on that.
Anyone else want to weigh in on this?
Yeah, I think that's fine.
that we
I know
need
I
more
was
people.
wrong on the nonconformity, so,
Yeah, Gary, I'm sorry, I couldn't hear at the beginning of that. Go ahead
no,
again.
I agree with Chuck. Like, I thought the nonconformity wouldn't have been an issue, and, again, Lord's point here, that was a major issue.
Well,
so.
we dropped Lord's
Huge.
point from the recommendation.
Yeah,
So
okay,
I don't want to get this bogged down with that.
Yeah,
Yep.
but still, just hearing from the community, I agree. Everyone's opinion counts here.
There were a lot of stakeholders that, Gary, if you recall, that appeared, in mostly the areas that were very small lots, and very concerned that anything would be reduced further, because some of them had decent setbacks and they wanted to maintain them.
Yeah.
and there was a loud cry for not doing this. So, and I think that's the direction we sort of conveyed. But again, I would need to hear from I think we all need to hear from the full commission on this. My opinion would be these are non-starters.
Okay. Anyone else have thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think we have to hear from the whole commission on this. Yeah, I agree.
Okay. All right, let's move on to what I hope will be an easier discussion. And that these are things that at least I feel we can move forward with. I think we have a lot of agreement. Staff seems to agree. And so I have 2 slides worth of this. Starting with recommendation 7, update the flood hazard overlay district regulations to ensure consistency with state and federal guidelines. And we followed Connecticut's model floodplain regs for coastal communities and made some very important changes. And this is not associated with either the freeboard or the look back period, but a bunch of other technical standards attached to this. Recommendation 9, update stormwater management standards and relocate technical standards from the regulations to the town's technical standards document. Recommendation 14, provide a reference to Stonington's aquifer protection area regulations in the zoning regulations and update the aquifer protection area regs. As you'll recall, there's no reference. Stonington does have a designated aquifer protection area, and there's no reference to that. In addition to that, there's a groundwater protection area designated by Rhode Island that extends into Stonington. And this recommendation recommends recognizing that area as well. Recommendation 15 is to establish lot coverage limits and eliminate the FAR standards. So to switch from FAR to lot coverage, and as we discussed earlier, there's really a lot that's contingent upon this shift. And I hope that we made a very good argument in favor of it. I think it makes all the sense in the world, and I've successfully moved other communities from an FAR to a lot coverage limit without any issue whatsoever. So I hope you'll agree we can do the same. Recommendation 21, reduce permit requirements for accessory dwelling units and clarify the regulatory language. So we're really, this goes back to what we were just talking about. We're really looking for ways to make accessory dwelling units more feasible. And recommendation 26, update regs for keeping of domestic animals. Just clean up some language that suggests that you can't keep pets under certain conditions. So I think we'll all be on board with that. All right, anything here that anyone's concerned about moving forward with?
I'm fine with it.
No? Yeah,
Okay.
I'm good.
Good. One more. I got one more for you. Recommendation 28, to rezone the area at Alpha Avenue and Cutler Street. And we kicked the tires on this one over several meetings. And we have something, I think, much like what we discussed earlier tonight regarding the C5 and RA20, where it just makes all the sense in the world to draw the zone properly and put it in the right zoning. This is really correcting an issue with the uses that are on zone that just doesn't make sense for the uses, and zone boundaries that split parcels in half and cover areas that just don't make sense. So I think this is really important cleanup work. Recommendation 30 started out as a very ambitious recommendation to reduce permit application requirements across commercial and industrial districts. And what we ended up with was agreement only on one use, laundromats in the PV5. So this would reduce laundromat from, I think, from the site plan or special permit requirement down to zoning permit. Recommendation 31 is to provide and to regulate adult-oriented establishments. You have no regulations for those right now. Recommendation 32 is outdoor vendor amendments, and this is just tightening up those regs a little bit. Recommendation 33 is to consolidate uses. You have some very specific use groups that really could be folded into larger use groups like retail. And so recommendation 33 does that, and it's limited in its scope, and it's very surgical. So I don't think we're going to create any problems with this. Recommendation 35 is to amend the permit requirements for off-street parking. And this was just a little loophole in the regs. Just Clifton, did this go through already? I remember I drafted something. I don't know. Did it already get approved, or is this still pending?
Which one again?
It was recommendation 35. It was to amend the permit requirements for off-street parking. And so we had like some loophole language that basically said that, as long as you didn't build out more than 20 units, you didn't have to get a special permit.
Technically, that's still in there.
It's still in there. Okay. So
it's still in there.
So this is a loophole. We're still interested in closing. I couldn't remember if it's one of those things that you went ahead and moved forward with. Okay, and it's real simple, some basic languages that essentially it says if you have parking for more than 20 vehicles, you have to get a special use permit. Then recommendation 37 is to update the parking area landscaping standards. And as you'll recall, we're shifting to a standard that's a little more specific as to how the planting needs to be provided, and we provide supplementary graphics and a little more instruction and detail to ensure that you get something that's effective. And at the same time, I hope simplifies things by getting rid of a vague standard that X% or X square foot of landscaping be provided, and then not in any way describing exactly how that landscaping should be provided, and instead provide some very clear direction to ensure you don't end up with large areas of unbroken pavement. Recommendation 39 is to update the sign regs, and it's a complete rewrite of the sign regs to move towards a content neutral regulation. And then recommendation 40 is to significantly update the outdoor lighting regulations to be dark sky compliant.
And we decided that for both commercial and residential, correct? All zones.
The outdoor lighting, Len?
Yes.
It is applicable to all development. The only exceptions or loopholes are if you have a fixture that's lower than a certain luminosity, which is like a 60 watt equivalent, 850 lumens, then that lighting is exempt. We've exempted police, fire, emergency services, short-term lighting for special events, flagpole lighting, and temporary holiday lighting. Otherwise, it's applicable to all properties in all zones.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yep.
I'm on board for advancing all of these.
Okay. Anyone else? Chuck?
I'm sorry. It looks good. It looks good to me. I was talking and I had my mic turned off.
No problem. No problem. All right. Okay, good. So our next steps, where do we go from here? So I've got quite a bit of work to do to reorganize these recommended amendments. What I want to do is I want to package these up. And I may or may not renumber them so that the numbering makes a little more sense based upon our approach. But I want to put them in buckets, if you will, packages. So everything that we just agreed you're comfortable moving forward with, and I realize you also want to have this discussion with the full commission. But if we have a certain degree of certainty that the items we just agreed to that you want to move forward with, that the rest of the commission is likely going to support, then what I'll do with those is I'll package them all up into one package. So I'll bundle them. and I'll provide an introductory letter that describes everything that's in the package. And it really explains, our recommendations as how to proceed. And I'll do the same for everything else that we're either modifying or leaving behind or tabling temporarily. So for the items that I think we have agreement that we don't want to revisit anytime soon, I'll bundle those so they aren't just lost in time and forgotten. I'll bundle those together. I'll provide a cover letter that explains why we're not moving forward with them, what the concerns were, and why we've tabled them indefinitely. I'll do the same for the items that we're temporarily tabling, right? Like anything related to pre-approved housing types and some of these other items that we feel just require more investigation or require something else to happen in order for the amendment to be adopted. I'll bundle those together with a summary that explains exactly why those are packaged together and what the next steps are for that. And then finally, I'll package this up all with a basic letter that describes what's in the package. And then I hand that over to you, to Clifton, and to you, Chuck, to the commission. And what I recommend is that everything that you probably want to, at your next zoning commission meeting, have this as an agenda item to go over everything that we've packaged. And then I think you need to agree as to what you want to move forward to a public hearing, because it's those items that we need to share with CCOG and with DEEP for their review. And we need to forward them a couple months for review and comment. And then it would be my recommendation that as soon as mid to late September, that you look to hold a public hearing to put these in front of the public and get things moving in terms of adoption. So that would be my advice to you, and I'll document all of that as I've described. But otherwise, for our purposes, we're done with, because we're not going to be developing any additional recommended amendments. We're done with our special meetings. The items we did talk about tonight, like the EDC's recommendations for Pawcatuck, I will take a look at that. I will put together some recommendations based upon that, and I'll add it to the things that require consideration by the commission. All right. Any questions or comments on that approach?
I think that's a very good summary of next steps. And I will encourage those commissioners who were not present this evening to look at this presentation so that they're familiar with the issues and can sort of, even though they weren't here, pick up where we leave off tonight in the items that we need further discussion on. I want to compliment you on your excellent work getting us to this phase. I think you were thorough, you were thoughtful, and whether anyone agrees or disagrees with you, they would never challenge that you're a subject area specialist because you are, and you've done a wonderful job.
I appreciate that, Chuck. Thank you. It's been a pleasure working with you folks, and I really look forward to helping you make some changes here, because I think it's going to benefit the commission, the town, and the community as a whole. So happy to do it.
Agreed.
Thanks, Francesco. You've been great to work with.
Oh, thank you, Lynn. I appreciate your level of investment in this and your commitment to the process. You've been there just about every month, and so I appreciate that.
You're welcome. Best of luck.
My thanks to Lynn and Gary, for their participation tonight. I certainly hear your comments, and although we may disagree on next steps, I certainly don't question your commitment, nor your interest, nor your commitment to the benefit of the town. So I do appreciate all the great work that everyone here does. Thank you.
Okay. And with that said, Chuck,
Clifton, we shouldn't leave you out. You know, or you, nor should you be the last to be considered. You know, you and Francesco have been a wonderful team, and you know, the collective benefit of both of your expertise, your youth, and your energy, and your vast experience in this have been a tremendous benefit to this town. You were relatively new to us when this started, and you're a very familiar face around town and on the media now because of the tremendous exposure that this has given to your expertise. So thank you as well.
Thank you, Chuck.
all right, Chuck, do you want to adjourn us?
Yes, I thank you all. I appreciate the fact that we're letting you all go a little early tonight, and more to follow on all of these items. And again, thank you for your commitment to the process. With that, I think we can adjourn.
Okay. Good night, everyone. Thank you.
All right, thank
Good
you.
night.
All right.